This is not an accurate map of Christianity and Islam in Africa, but it does show you the history of where people landed. Some people have many doubts about how North Africa gained Islam and how it quickly and rapidly took over, including some parts that are just outside Africa that connected, like the Iberian regions, and also the areas of Israel and those places. It's easy to forget that places like that were dominated by Islam, and then the rest of Africa did not even know of Christianity. If it wasn't for the few groups that held their own against the Muslims in a time of rebellion, there would have been nothing to fight for. But there's something else that we need to talk about when it comes to the religion that existed called Christianity at the time, and why Ethiopia became a place where people from all over the world would come and pray. Ethiopia is one of the few places in Africa's history where Jesus and Mary are depicted as both black. Mary is depicted as black and Jesus is depicted as black. And not only are they depicted as black, but they're depicted as Ethiopian in their form. This gives us the impression that the Ethiopians thought that Jesus was black. In real life, everybody sort of made Jesus look the way that they did because at that time, Christianity was not about race. Christianity reflected the art of the people in the day. We can look at ancient pictures of Christ and say, oh, his earliest pictures, some of them make him look like he's a Roman. But that reflection is not a reflection of his real life, but a reflection that Jesus looks like every single person. Not only do we know this from the drawings from around the world, which Christians who eventually would reach these areas did not protest against, but we know this from the fact that the writings of Jesus himself says he came for everybody. Not for one person, not for two people, but for everybody. Now, I want to state that this is not a religious page. I'm not doing this to be religious or anything like that. I'm just saying this because it gives us a different type of history. I also want to remind people that because of this Christian Islamic divide, but let's say prior to Islam even existing, because of this Christian connection, it reminds us that there was a time in history where not only did the races get along, but they had a reason to connect with one another. And that reason was salvation of all man, good versus evil. Although this not so accurate map captures some of the Islamic states, which are in the north, they don't really capture how Islamic or Christian they are. I mean, most of the Ethiopian regions that are colored are definitely incorrect. But it does bring up the question, when did these places gain any of these religions? So for Islam, it's not even hard to figure out when. And for Islam, it's not difficult to know that it was at least the most spread religion in Africa first before Christianity. So Islam at first was Africa's favorite religion. I don't need to read anything to prove this, since in the part of Ethiopia that would eventually become Somalia and some independent states inside of Ethiopia, the people were Muslim in those areas. And then if you went down the Swahili coast, that entire region was Muslim. There is even thought that some of these central areas had been touched by Islam, somewhere in the Central African Republic and also in Congo and maybe even Zambia. We all know how Christianity came to that area, and it came fairly late to that region. Yet, when it comes, Christianity comes with the same concept as all, which is your religion is not fake. Your religion is just not fully advised on reality. And so you get the Garden of Eden appearing all over Africa. Congo has been accused of being the Garden of Eden, not only by people today, but by Kempavita back in the day during the Kingdom of Congo. And she was executed for this. In South Africa, there are plenty of people who accused it. Both white Christians and black Christians said that Eden was inside of South Africa. And some even said that the real Israel was in South Africa. If you remember, I read about Great Zimbabwe and also Dumbashaba and all of these places around. And one of the Europeans who made their way there said that there was a rumor that Israelites had passed this area and that some of the technology that was from this area was responsible for some of the buildings in Israel. And the guy said, yeah, and it kind of makes sense because the buildings here are very well built. This tells us that there were people living in that area during the Islamic age while Christians had suddenly come out of nowhere, European Christians, Portuguese, and they were trying to claim that they were connected to Israel. And this happens a lot. This is what I think is the winning factor between the two religions that we see here, that they have this ability to connect with the cultures. If you think of Mormonism, if you think of any other religion that was created, or any other faction or side of Christianity or sect of Christianity in the Americas, it starts somehow by connecting itself to the continent that it's in. And once it does that, it's pretty much going to be accepted by anybody. Something I have heard some people say, which is absolutely not true, is that Judaism did not do this prior to Christianity. Now, Judaism is not as widespread as Islam and Christianity, but when it first started, it spread far and wide to places as far as China. This tells us that it had this international mindset. You cannot convince people that they must accept people far away from their own land, that the people who are the chosen ones are people in another homeland. The only way you can do that is by convincing them that they too are connected to that homeland. And that's why there is the Igbos who believe, after tons of writings, and I'm not saying they're wrong, that they are Igbo Jews, a lost tribe of Judah, and that even the word Igbo is a version of the Hebrews. The interesting thing is the many versions of Africans who believe that they are a lost tribe of Israel, they do not necessarily believe that the other versions from Africa are accurate when they say that they are, themselves are children of Israel. Another group is the Lemba of Zimbabwe. The Lemba, who have been genetically tested, have a minority Semitic ancestry for some people. And this claim, they say, elevates them to the point that it proves their already known ideas that they are another version of people from Israel. Again, This is not something that I would dispute or anything like that because it is, for me, not that important. What's interesting is the history that lies behind it and how it differentiates itself from all the other people who would consider themselves Israelites. If you take this story, or if you take this historical point of view that the Lemba are an Israeli export, then it sort of starts to make sense if you add the other things that have been thrown around it. So, for example, the other stone buildings that are thrown around and said to have been built by an offshoot, or the offshoot from this region built the stone walls of Israel. There is possibly no group on this earth that has a stronger connection to Israel, being far away from Israel, than the people of Yemen and Ethiopia. Not only are they mentioned inside the Bible related to these stories and have direct connections to a lot of these stories, including quotes that you could pull out from the Bible that put them in Israel, put a writing that they will leave Israel. And then, of course, some theorists that talk about the different journeys that Noah would take, which I'm going to come to that for a second. And then you have the all of these tribes located in Ethiopia who themselves say that yes, although we are Christian, or that those people were Jewish
There
prior
are some
to us
signs
becoming
too.
Christian inside of Ethiopia that tells us that this information is possibly correct, and that by the time that Christianity is fully accepted in Ethiopia by the big state at the time, that Christianity had been existing in that area for the past 400 years. Even in the Bible, it writes that a servant from Ethiopia came down from Israel and landed. In this case, Ethiopia means Sudan, or any area lower than Egypt. And this place of Ethiopia had one of the earliest converts to Christianity. But that's not the interesting part. The interesting part is that he was going past Israel so that he can go and pray. In other words, he came to Israel as a Jew. Another group of Africa that claims to be connected to the Jews is the Amazigh. The Amazigh, as well, like the Lemba, have some ancestry that they feel proves this history. Now, this is where things get a little bit interesting, because the North African Jews who are written about, and the Ethiopian Jews that are written about, and the Central African Jews that are written about, all come from the same sources. But for some reason, the ones in North Africa are taken more seriously than the ones that exist in the southern areas. So if we take some examples, in the writings where they involve the Songhai, Jews from Morocco find it extremely hostile, and they move south to the Songhai Empire. When they get to the Songhai Empire, they mate with the people who are already there, fusing their blood with the West Africans, meaning they are genuinely some people from West Africa who, at least by written records, can claim to be actual Jews in heritage, in blood. And then there is the Kingdom of Congo, of course, where Kimpavita and a lot of other people claimed that the Jews were from that area. The claims of Kimpavita are slightly different than those of all the rest, because these are claiming and are accurate to some degree based on some evidence that they put forward. These claims only tell us that the people that we're talking about are Jewish. Kimpavita's claims was that the entire Bible, everything you read in the Bible, took place in Congo. From what happened in Egypt, from what happened in Israel, from Jonah and the whale, everything she claimed actually happened in Congo, the Kingdom of Congo. This, of course, did not sit well with much of the Christians in the area, but statues and also the fact that Antonianism, which was the religion that she followed, that kind of started the whole idea, it's proven that people continued to believe it after she died and probably believed it before she was born, which tells you that Christianity was doing what it does best, which is cement itself within the populations. Now, I didn't want to put this one in the list because at the same time, it's not the same as the rest, because the rest are just claiming to be Jewish. Hebrew Israelites as well are a little bit different than a lot of these claims. Hebrew Israelites, a lot of them, are Christian, and their claim is that they're Jews who went through a lot of these things, but they read from the Christian Bible. They're basically Christians, and a lot of them, they take a lot of their ideas or their concept for Judaism from Christianity.
Came from Africa. And actually, I brought this chart right here so you can see. Now, this is a Negro land, right? This is actually the place where our people came from, the west part of Africa, right by Ghana, right? And so if you look deeply into this, you can see Benjamin, you can see Judah, right? You can actually see that the tribes of Israel was in this place.
Like most people who claim to be of Israeli heritage, there is a bit of exclusivity that is expected from this. And so they separate the other Africans from the specific tribe that they would call the Hebrews.
Right? So when they was actually selling people, our people, on slave ships, right? You know what they called them?
What?
Hebos or Igbos.
This was from all parts of Africa or just that particular area?
Well, they went to that particular part of Africa and they got most of us from there, but we got scattered to the four corners of the earth. But that
So I want to be certain about this. There is a difference between the Igbo Jews who believe that they're just Jews and they do not believe in Jesus. At least they do not accept Jesus as the Mashiach or the Messiah, and the Jews or the Hebrew Israelites who believe in Jesus. There is a huge difference there.
that was our main place that we was at. They wasn't grabbing regular Africans, they was grabbing the Hebrew Israelites.
Now, I want to state my opinion about who these people are and if it is possible that they are Jewish. Well, so let's start with, did Jews leave Israel? The answer is absolutely, and they even formed empires and stuff like that left Israel and ended up in places like Yemen, like Africa, and they traveled throughout the East African regions. This is historically accurate 100%. We know with written things, with Ethiopian kings fighting Jews in that area. Ethiopia further ties itself with the story of Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, which ties it to Yemen, since Sheba is in Yemen, which makes the story that much more interesting. Now, this is obvious because Sabaean is found all over Ethiopia. which means not only do they have real evidence that the Sabaeans, which we know had Jews, the Sabaeans, which are Yemenites, which we know had Jews, were found in Ethiopia at the same time, and even have evidence that they shared writing. Their history of writing goes with one another. This tells us that that claim is absolutely true. The claim of West African Jews is another one that is quite possibly true. And the reason why it has a high likelihood of truth, not necessarily the word Igbo being Hebo or whatever, but the the fact that some of them must have been Jewish is that there's a long history of Jewish people existing in the western parts of Africa, coming from Egypt, firstly from Israel, moving through Egypt and North Africa, and ending up in West Africa. And this is written down information prior to slave ships coming from America and taking people. The Lemba, of course, have a long distance shot of being related to the real Jews, but their Semitic influence does not take that away from them. In fact, it adds to it, so it's highly possible. In the case of Kimpavita, it's pretty obvious that the claim that she makes cannot be fully true. Now, is it possible that Jewish people could have made their way there? Is it possible? Do I think they did? Again, possible. But that's not exactly the claim that she makes. And in fact, most people in the Kingdom of Congo do not claim to be Jewish at all. Now, I want to state that this is not a Africa thing, claiming to be Jewish. Like I mentioned, there are Chinese Jews who claim that there are actual Jews who left Israel and came to China and had children. Again, another claim that needs to be deeply investigated if you want to know the truth. Then, of course, there's Ashkenazi Jews, another group of people which a lot of people like to say has no validity behind it. But, you know, Jews got around. People don't understand that Jews in the past were no different than Arabs, were no different than Egyptians, were no different than other groups. They spread the world over. Now, are all the claims of these people who claim to be Jewish real? I actually have no idea. I think it's a very complicated question, but it is an interesting one. Having some connections to the Semitic world does not necessarily stamp you out as Jewish, as there are many people who lived in the Semitic world who did not claim to be Jewish and in fact did not even like the Jewish concepts. Now, I have to remind you though that there's a lot of weird things going around where people are saying Judaism was not a religion and all of that. Judaism was absolutely a religion, and not only was it a religion, it had different sects, different broken parts of Judaism. Today, the way they look at Judaism is more of a culture and ethnicity than a religion, but it was not always that way. And I can prove that, but that will be for another day.